All right, so yeah, this is the last day that we all have to get through without losing our shit or killing anyone, right? Before spring break starts. So good for us, good for all of us. We made it this far. So I just want to talk a little bit first about what we're going to be doing when we come back. Frankly, I like to go over this stuff at the beginning of class while I still have your full attention before you've got bored. For Tuesday when we come back, right? Remember, paper 1 is due, and you'll be reading "A Good Man is Hard to Find" by Flannery O'Connor in the Green Anthology. Right now, the two critical systems we'll be using next time to discuss this are Marxism and New Historicism. I'll explain those in a moment, right? I've also decided to move the due date for the first literary reflection from this week to the end of the week we come back, right? In part because, honestly, as we were doing the philosophy stuff, I started rethinking the way I wanted you to do the literature stuff, and I came up with this. So I need a little bit of time to rewrite the literary reflection assignment as it looks on Georgia View, and this gives you a little bit more time to let some of this stuff sink in, right? Okay, so anybody have any questions about what we're doing going forward? All right, I will take your silence to mean no. So let me give you the sheet for what we're doing next time, right? So I'll explain this to you today so that you know what we're doing as you read "A Good Man is Hard to Find" over the break, right? And once again, this is going to require some preparation prior to class, right? Whichever of these theories you're approaching this from, because we're looking now at theories that are based in historical reasoning and that are largely about contextualizing what you're reading. So you are going to have to know a little bit about, in particular, the historical context of the work you're looking at, right? So you see I've got two systems up on the board here. Some of you are going to be doing Marxism, right? Cindy, Xavier, Chase, Caressa. Caressa's not here. All right, that's what you'll be doing. Mackenzie, Camby, and Brian, you guys will be doing New Historicism. Now, I know, yes, this says Marxism up here, right? I am not trying to turn all of you into communists, right? So before anybody goes reporting me to any professor watch lists or, campus truth organizations or anything like that, right? I'm just trying to teach you a particular method of reading text that is commonly used by literary critics, right? So don't freak out about it. I'm not trying to get you to go out and abolish private property or anything like that, right? So let's start there. So if you're doing Marxist criticism, you're starting from the following basic assumptions, right? First, that art is a social construct. And that you cannot study any particular work of art independently of other factors in the culture that produced it, right? We're still not worried so much about the author, right? We're not thinking of a work of art or a work of literature as the product of an author's mind. We're looking at it, if we're looking at it from a Marxist perspective, we're looking at it as the product of a particular culture in a particular time and place, right? So the form and content of any work of art are determined by social relations, economic forms, and political practices of the time and place in which that work of art was produced, right? So if you are looking at, say, a novel from 19th century England, right? What a Marxist critic is going to do is look at that particular novel as an expression of, or as a product of, the economic realities and the prominent social relationships and political formations of that day, right? That it expresses the primary concerns of its culture in that particular time, right? Everybody with me so far? Okay. If anybody gets confused, stop me and ask questions. All right, so a Marxist critic refers to the form culture takes in any given historical period as the superstructure, right? So superstructure, this means this is cultural practices, right? This is anything from art to religion to politics, right? The superstructure is determined, is shaped by the economic system that underlies this particular culture, this particular period, right? So the economic structure, right, the economic system is called the base. And things in the superstructure, like cultural practices, will tend to mimic in various ways, or be determined by the base, right? So to give you an example, if we look at the differences in the way, if we look at certain differences in different Christian sects, right? If we look at the way the Catholic Church is set up against the way, contemporary evangelical church is set up, right? What's the authority structure of the Catholic Church look like? Who's in charge of the Catholic Church? Really? Okay, you've got a priest, right? And who does the priest answer to?
The Pope?
Ultimately the Pope, right? The Pope is at the top, and the Pope doles out territory to cardinals, right? Who run larger territory, large territories across the world. And the cardinals dole out authority to bishops, right, who run, individual cities. And those bishops then dole out individual churches to parish priests, right? So you've got one guy at the top who gives out land and responsibility to people at the bottom, who then distribute to people below them, right? So when this particular authority structure came into being, right, the dominant economic form in Europe was called feudalism. Any of you ever heard of feudalism? Anybody know what feudalism is?
No, feudal.
Okay, what does feudal mean?
Or like futile.
Oh, futile is something entirely different, yeah. Okay, so feudalism is essentially, like, the basic idea that underlies it is the king owns all of the land. And the king gives out parcels of that land to his supporters so that they can, raise enough funds to support his projects, and so they can raise enough soldiers to fight in his wars, right? So a king will give out land to dukes. The dukes will give out land to counts. The counts will give out land to barons. The barons will give out land to knights, so on and so forth, right? So you see how the cultural practice, right, the religious structure, mirrors the economic structure that's prevalent in that time period, right? I'm just trying to give you an example of this. So, literature and art in particular, according to a Marxist, will often reflect the values and interests of the ruling class, right? This is called ideology. Right? Because the dominant class in any society has control of most of the means of distributing information, their values tend to become everybody's values, right? So ideology refers to these kind of normative values in a given society, right? And these are usually going to be the values of the ruling class. All right. Also, all societies contain contradictions between their ideals and their reality, right? For example, we can see even in our own country's founding documents the notion that all men are created equal alongside other clauses that state that some people only count as 3/5 of a person for counting population, right? And don't have the same rights that are given to others. So all societies, according to a Marxist, contain these kinds of contradictions, right? That their reality doesn't quite live up to the ideals that they express. So some works of art are going to try to convince various cultural outgroups that their exclusion from power is somehow just and fair, right? The idea is going to be to try to bring them along into the normative ideology by showing them that, see, this is how things have to be. Others are going to push against the ideology and sort of point out the spots where it's unfair, right? So the thing that you need to do, if this is what you are assigned to do, right? If this is what you're working on, you need to know something about the history, the cultural context, and the economic underlying system in the period in which this story was written, right? So look at the end of the story to find the date, right? Find when it was written, right? Read the story to think about, where and when it's set. And try to relate the story to the values of that time period, right? Particularly whatever the economic system, the economic structure, the economic hierarchy would have been in that time period, right? Who's powerful, who's not powerful? How is this regarded as fair or just, right? And what's the underlying ideology, right? What seems to be the set of values, right? The set of dominant values underlying this particular text? And does it come into conflict with any other set of values? Okay, anybody have any questions about this? Okay, I have also, put up, not only are these handouts on Georgia View for your reference, but I have also put up a couple of sample readings, right, that you can look at for help. All right, so if you're doing new historicist criticism, you also care about the historical context of the work, but you are going to be approaching this a little bit differently. So we call this new historicism because old-fashioned historicism was mostly just about footnoting, right? You were sort of providing the kinds of historical references that somebody would need to understand what's going on in a particular text. So say, okay, you have to know something about this battle, or you have to know something about, the reign of this king, or what have you, right? New historicism works differently. New historicism is more about the nature of the text itself and how it works, right? Please pay attention, don't be texting in class. So for a new historicist, history, right, we tend to think of history in a history class as like a kind of stable set of facts and dates, right? You're given a list of dates you're supposed to memorize, You know, you are supposed to remember when things happen for the exam, right? What's the importance of this particular historical event, right? Now, if you're coming at it from this perspective, you believe that history, in its written form anyway, is subjective. That a historian, when writing, has no choice but to use the same tools that are available to the novelist, the creative writer, right? So, a history book is still written using perspective characters, using a narrative structure, and selection of incidents, right? You can't describe a historical event from every participant's perspective, right? You have to choose certain points of view that you're going to privilege. And you have to try to fit it into some greater narrative of how history works more broadly. Right? It's like, what's the importance of this event, right? What's the story I'm trying to tell about this event? And which incidents, which events are important enough for me to include in this sort of limited work that I'm trying to produce, right? So our own human limitations limit the historian in this way, right? So any history is, I'm not going to, they wouldn't say it's quite a work of fiction, but it uses the techniques of fiction. So what this means is that history writing and literary writing are both expressions of the major discourses in a particular culture, in a particular time, in a particular place, right? Like Marxism, it's very much focused on historical context, right? So it will tell you a lot about what a certain subset of people valued in a particular time and place, right? So what you want to see, what you want to do when you're doing a new historicist reading is think about, right, what discourses and whose discourses are privileged here. Right. Whose point of view, from a broader cultural standpoint, is this text endorsing? So when you're reading A Good Man is Hard to Find, right? This is what you're going to be trying to look for, is like, what is the cultural point of view here, right? Is the perspective character, the perspective character is a white Southern grandmother from Atlanta in the late 1940s. So what you want to figure out is whether the story privileges her viewpoint and her attitudes or someone else's, right? All right, what else? Okay. So, history and literature along with painting, sculpture, theater, right, are all forms of cultural display. Right? That is, right, they are, sort of externalizations of the values of a particular culture. Cultural display tends towards reinforcement of existing power structures. Right? If you think about Renaissance painting, for example, right? A lot of painters, just to make a living, painted these very exaggerated portraits of these spectacularly plain spouses of their patrons, right? Because you were essentially, in order to keep yourself in work, right, in order to keep yourself producing, you had to suck up to people who were more powerful than you. So, in that sense, art tends towards what new historicists call containment, right? The reinforcement of existing power structures. But it often contains elements of subversion. Right? Pointing out little cracks in the existing power structure that could be widened and exploited to take it down, right? So one thing that you are going to want to do if you're doing a new historicist reading of this story, right, is you want to think about to what extent it's containing and to what extent it's subverting, right? To what extent is it about reinforcing the beliefs and values of the people in power, and to what extent is it about pushing back against them? Okay, so this is all what you're going to be doing for next time, right? So for today, what I asked you to do was a psychoanalytic reading of Bartleby the Scrivener, right? I gave some of you Freud to work with, I gave some of you Lacan to work with, so what I would like you to do now is split up into those groups and try to talk through what it was you were able to come up with, all right? All right, go to it.